Now, up next, I'd like to introduce our second executive panel conversation of the day, which will focus on how worker affinities can help guide corporate culture. As social issues evolve and workforces grow more diverse, workplace culture needs to be responsive to changing worker affinities and causes. So how can organizations position themselves to adapt their culture to incorporate new needs, to recognize their employees for their contributions, and maintain an ongoing understanding of what's important to their employees? As our interviewer for this session from day one is delighted to welcome Emily McCrary-Ruiz-Esparza, a freelance journalist based in Richmond, Virginia, whose work has appeared in the Washington Post, Fast Company, and many others. Emily, take it away.
Thank you very much, Steve, and I'm very happy to be here with all of our panelists. We don't have a lot of time, so let's not waste any of it. Let's get right to it. Before we get into our questions, I'd like to have each of our panelists introduce themselves very briefly, who you are, where you work, and what you do there. And I can't resist. I have to start with David because I can tell we share an affinity for really great frames. Yes. So let's go to you first.
That's great. Thanks for the opportunity. And hi, everybody. Yes, the glasses get bigger as I get older. Soon I'll be wearing a face shield. My name's David Bator, and I work for Achievers. We're an employee experience platform that engages employees and empowers managers through employee recognition and listening. And my job is I lead our Workforce Institute. We're a team of workforce and data scientists that not only underpin the product we developed for our more than 400 customers globally, but also the counsel that we share with customers and the broader community. So delighted to be here today.
Thanks, David. Vidya?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Vidya Ayyr. I'm the Director of Social Impact at Parkland Health in Dallas, Texas. We are the third largest safety net in the country with about 13,000 employees and serve a very diverse population. In my role, I lead high impact interventions to address the social determinants of health, bridging the gap between the health system and the community.
Thanks. Welcome. And Elizabeth?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for including me in this great discussion. I work for Monster.com. I oversee our brand and communications function, and communications and brand at Monster pretty much includes all of our audience touch points. So that would be across internal communications, how we're engaging with our employees, as well as advertising, PR, content, and social. So looking at the full communication ecosystem and ensuring all of our messages that we're bringing out to the outside world also work internally.
Christine?
Hi, everyone. Christine Salerno. I lead social impact at Marsh McLennan, which is probably one of the largest companies you've never heard of. We own Marsh, Mercer, Guy Carpenter, and Oliver Wyman. I sit at the corporate center where I oversee the corporate social responsibility, social impact strategy for the company. And I think right now we're close to 100,000 employees in over 130 countries. So looking forward to the conversation.
Very large organization. And Ben, please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I think I'm going last because my frames aren't as exciting. I'm a little boring today, so sorry for the B game, not the A game. We'll let Emily and David have those titles. I'm currently at Amazon Web Services. I'm actually brand new to the organization. I just joined 2 weeks ago, so a lot of my responses will be more structured around past experience or personal perspectives. Currently, I'm a principal ID&E inclusion, diversity, and equity business partner, but previously I was at Expedia Group and then Salesforce prior, leading human rights and especially their employee resource groups global ecosystem.
Great. All right. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today falls under the umbrella of CSR or corporate social responsibility. So what do we know about how the presence of a CSR plan, of even just awareness in the organization of what that means, how does that affect company culture? Is there a relationship between CSR and then employee job satisfaction? Do we have anecdotal evidence? Do we have data-backed evidence of that? Or can you talk about how you think about that in your organizations? And I'd like to begin with Elizabeth on this question, please.
Great. It is a great question. And the quick answer is absolutely. There's a relationship between corporate social responsibility and job satisfaction. Salary and benefits are definitely no longer enough to drive employee satisfaction as they were in the not too distant past. And people really want to understand, first and foremost, the mission that a company is working towards. So at the highest level for Monster, so we conducted a global survey a few years ago where we talked to thousands of people all around the globe and asked them kind of what characteristics in a company not only would you want to work for, but would you want to do business with. And one of the things that came to the top was, we want a company that, and this was like a quote from several people, that does right by society. And basically what that means, and when we dug a little further in terms of what it meant for Monster specifically, was what we do by putting people in jobs and providing employment, which is so personal and important in people's lives, in and of itself is a social responsibility. So before getting into any kind of cultural nuances and things like that, what we do at our core is incredibly important. And so first and foremost, it's getting employees kind of behind that mission and understanding the importance of what people, every single one of us, bring to our jobs every single day. And it provides a sense of purpose for everybody to rally behind. Second, outside of that, people want to work for a company that has a heart, right? That is in it for the right reasons. We also understand that different people have different social causes or different priorities that are important to them based on who they are. And so one of the things that we have done is pushed on a few paid for volunteer days. So that allows employees to actually select what they want to work on or where they want to give back without having to take work hours to do that. So that's kind of the second thing, making it personal so that it works for employees. And then finally, I guess the other thing I would say, and then there are things that the company itself stands behind. And one of the things that we're kind of very thoughtful in how we're engaging our employees is, let's not go out and just put out blanket statements on things. Let's figure out what we can stand behind as an organization that we can actually impact and make a difference as a company. So I will give kind of two examples. One, and I'm guessing these examples, other panelists may have very similar examples, but COVID is an obvious one, right? So, pandemic hits, world of work completely is changed in a way that it had not been changed forever, and people's needs, the industries that we're hiring and what people were looking for kind of changed. One of the things that Monster knew, and as did most of the world, that there was a real shortage of healthcare workers, right? So immediately, one of the things that we did as a company is we offered free job postings to healthcare companies looking to fill frontline workers. And we partnered with, and within healthcare specifically, many of the long-term senior care facilities were really, really hurting hard. And so we partnered with one of those organizations to help specifically be all in and filling some of those roles. We engaged the full organization around this. We have social sharing tools that enabled employees to actually kind of promote some of the things that we were doing as a company and try to rally support through their own networks for that. A second example is the war in Ukraine. We stood up a job site for Ukrainian refugees. Many monsters took refugees into their homes. We provided support and food. And we also did a donation program where we donated some money and matched employees who wanted to do the same personally. So those are kind of three areas. Understand your mission, find the causes that you can truly impact with or without budget. None of those things necessarily cost us a ton of money. Find those things that you can impact and allow people to support the charities and organizations that are important to them.
I want to talk about the ways you can sort of get your workforce excited about the things that about the causes that are personal to them. You mentioned, war in Ukraine, COVID specific stuff. Vidya, I know that with your workforce, you encourage your staff to bring what they care about into employee advocacy and employee activism. Can you talk about how that works at Parkland?
Absolutely, and thank you so much. And to the work that Elizabeth and you and your team are doing too. So I kind of wanted to share a little bit more about the work that we undertook, and certainly in alignment with the pandemic. But I also wanted to put some facts and figures, as you asked earlier. There was actually a new study released by Deloitte. 89% of employees think that organizations should sponsor volunteer activities and offer better overall working environments. In addition, specifically, 3/4 of millennials surveyed also said that they would want to volunteer more and to understand about the impact that they were making. So I want to share a little bit about the work of the Young Professionals Affinity Group that I started at Parkland, and then given examples of how self-motivated employees advocacy has really also benefited our organization. So when I created Young Professionals for Parkland, which we lovingly call YP4P, there weren't any really structured ERGs focusing on that. And we also wanted to incorporate community-based individuals, so beyond just our employee base. So that was a really good selling point for us for advocacy, because there was a real appetite to understand public health in our community. So we began with a speaker series that kind of highlighted the top growing crises in our community, and then notably also opening that invitation to beyond our staff included recruiting community advocates and other volunteers from partner organizations. So we were able to kind of leverage their momentum as well to kind of further back some of the work that we were doing at the hospital to address some of these growing crises. The first one that we identified, and this was pre-pandemic, was childhood obesity and diabetes. And then the second one was housing instability. So I kind of also say that within our workplace environments, looking at our community partners and how they can also help amplify some of the messaging around the work that we do could be an opportunity. Then I wanted to give just one really quick example of how we had community advocates at the hospital who were able to identify a growing need and develop a program around that during the pandemic. So during the pandemic, some of our staff actually were concerned about the rising rates of food insecurity. And they were volunteering as advocates at a food bank and noticed that those who were self-isolating were not able to come by as often. So when they brought this to my attention, we worked with a team of our patients, providers, community partners to add a food insecurity question along with our contact tracing question. So if a patient screened positive for both COVID as well as food insecurity, we had a group of volunteers making food boxes and delivering it to them during that 2-week quarantine period, enough food for themselves and for their families. So I think there's a way in which we can address some of the needs of our community just by having our staff be ears to the ground.
How and in what ways do employee-driven programs like that actually affect the culture? I like the structure of these things. What does it do within an organization? Christine, because CSR is your world, can you talk about what actually happens inside a company and whether this has the ability to affect the way a business operates?
Yeah. So, I launched the CSR function in 2010. So I've been at this for a long time. And I have seen time and again how, our company is very much, we've got 4 very different businesses, very different operations, and we're, often co-located. And there's never any engagement across, across these, they sit on the same floor, but no one talks to each other, right? And so one of the things that I've seen evolve over the decade plus that I've been doing this at Marsh McLennan is that the volunteering programs that we have fostered this cross-business collaboration. People are talking, people who would normally not ever have an opportunity or desire to talk to another colleague, they actually end up talking and sharing ideas and having potentially similar clients. And so we see, there's this desire now where there's a lot more volunteering opportunities happening across the businesses, not just within the business, but across the businesses, that really drives, the bottom line eventually. So I've definitely seen an evolution over the past decade plus in terms of getting, how our programs have been able to sort of create as like a guiding light for culture. How do we give back? Why do we give back? What are the ways that we give back? And again, we keep it very open because we don't want to exclude colleagues and we want them to, work on the things that they're passionate about, but we actually do have some key partnerships and programs that all colleagues around the world can engage in. So it's sort of being able to do that creates this opportunity to tell a story about our colleagues and how they're giving back, and really showcase the work that we're doing. Another thing that has recently started happening, and again, this move from being in the office all the time, 2020 before, like there was always colleagues were getting together, and now we're in this hybrid environment and it's difficult to get people to the office. At least, we're seeing that. I don't know if you guys are, but we're seeing that it's difficult to get people to the office. And one of the ways that we are getting people to the office, and again, where it's safe to do this, but is organizing, and again, my team doesn't organize all of these activities, but like working with people on the ground to organize these volunteer activities so that there is a reason to go in. And more recently with new hires, when we've got people coming into the organization that don't know anyone and they're starting at the company, in our locations where we've got significant headcount, we are doing quarterly new hire volunteer activities so that, and again, across the businesses. So you're creating those connections early on in their, in their journey at the company. And all of this creates a stronger outcome for our business.
David, what would you add to that when it comes to connecting hybrid remote workforces, maybe even people who can't come into a central office? So maybe you've got a colleague in Detroit and you're in Paris. Is there a way to use advocacy, activism, volunteering to connect those people?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll tackle it maybe from a couple of perspectives. First, just picking up on what Christine talked about around the utility of storytelling. I completely agree. I think there's a real opportunity for all of us in the work that we do in creating the conditions that employees can be successful from anywhere, regardless of how long they've been with our company, where they do their job, or what their job is. Socializing the stories of what great can look like is really, really important, because stories travel and stories inspire individuals. If I see that Michigan and Paris example, and I see local examples of activism that may inspire me as a new employee, as Ben is, to say, oh, that maybe that's something that I could do tomorrow. I just never thought of it before. What our research indicates is that employees do have this desire to belong and to connect with those that not only have influence inside their immediate work circle, but outside of it. And also those that care about the same things and issues that they do. And I think what's true is that most of us go to work every single day and we are asked to perform a very specific function. But in our personal lives, our opinions, our talents are sought because we're caregivers, we're coaches, we're parents, we're partners. I think the truth is we're unique and we're far more than our work. Elizabeth shared that employees want to work for organizations that share their values and look for the same in their managers and their leaders. And she's exactly right. That's true. And so what we want to do is find those opportunities to give employees the opportunity to wave the flag. And this should have very little to do with where you work. I even love the examples from Vidya because they came from frontline employees. And so they either created a space for employees to volunteer those ideas or they asked the question directly. I think what I finish with here in answer to your question is that my grandmother used to say that charity begins at home. And another way of looking at that is by saying that, all politics are local. I think the point is that hybrid and remote employees present an opportunity to really amplify the reach of our activism by extending to the very communities that they live in, not just where their headquarters are located.
I'm curious to know if when your employees have brought causes, raised their hand and said, hey, this is what I'd like to address, maybe my ERG is interested in supporting this cause or this organization. Have new business functions come out of that? Have you adapted values to include these types of things? I'm seeing some head nodding. Elizabeth, is that something that you've done?
Yeah, absolutely. Our employee research source groups at Monster are incredibly active, and have actually influenced policy. So we recently, as an example, we recently changed our maternity leave policy. It was, as a result of parent and caregiver in conjunction with Pride, working together to make sure that we had coverage for adoptive assistance, same-sex marriages. We completely overhauled it, and it was because of those ERGs that brought a lot of those concerns and best practices to the table. The same thing with our veterans and military family ERG. There was a new benefit that was put that was created for one. It was one employee who was requesting the benefit, but it was the power of the full ERG that came together and their collective voice that allowed us to be able to make some of those changes. So they're super important groups. They bring people together to kind of the point that several of the other panelists are making. They take a remote workforce from all over the country. They bring people together based on shared interests, passions, and a sense of belonging, and are actually able to influence policy internally.
Ben, I know in your current role and in former roles as well, you've been really heavily involved in ERGs. I'd like for you to talk about the functions that an ERG can serve. Sometimes it's just a way to form a community of friends, and that's a worthy cause too, but that's not their only purpose. Could you talk about the role that an ERG can play in an organization, and then the governance of it, which I find really interesting, which I know you're really involved in. So those two things, and your glasses are great. So
thank you so much. I felt so much better than insecure just the whole time, y'all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, I think, as I've been thinking about the responses from my fellow panelists, there's a real power in these communities getting engaged and volunteering. And I want to speak to a little bit some of the risks of burnout. And one of the ways that I've addressed that in my work and working with ERGs is developing real structure and governance around how the ERGs operate, how they access resources within the company. David mentioned creating these conditions for employees to be successful. And part of that is just some guidelines, really permission to set up boundaries. I frequently have seen ERGs with just the most passion in the world set out in hundreds of different directions, and they burn out. And they're frustrated that the change wasn't realized, and they come back to me or even other readers and say, like, what went wrong here? And one way to really help them was build a sort of governance structure to mobilize sometimes hundreds of people in a consistent direction. This really helps them with setting those boundaries. Keep in mind, those of you that are listening and watching, that these are volunteers. And so they're often hired for something entirely different. So they have to figure out how to manage their career, their own development within the journey of pursuing their passions, because it makes them more satisfied, engaged. So one thing that I've been working on over the past few years is just designing a global governance model, which includes the admin and operations to bring people together. Of course, it's aligned to how it's connected to our company visions, values, goals, whatever you might call them. And then a real focus on two different things. Of course, there's the awareness and the growth. I think that's sort of the one that's most often thought about, how you can earn more membership, get people involved into your cause. But especially when we're speaking to underrepresented ERGs, I think there's a component of development that's forgotten. And too often I might see ERGs so focused on spreading the message and the storytelling, which is critically important. But there's a lack of focus on developing the body of people from within. Those are the skills, professional development, making sure that they are providing safe spaces for the needs of the community. And so that's sort of how I've structured the governance inside each of the companies I've worked for. And those normally correspond to some basic roles like global communications chair, if you will. Global growth chair is another one. And then another one that I've thought of too in the past is global development chair. And this person is specifically responsible for thinking about the skills that the community might need. And then again, driving that in a direction of something that's aligned to the business, able to set boundaries, communicating with managers so that they know to work with this leader so that they don't burn out. And we've seen some really cool success metrics. One basic one is just 50% year-over-year growth. I've seen that across almost all ERGs that I've worked with roughly. I'm averaging pretty hard here. And another pretty cool one is in working on this development component, last year we had 75% of our global ERG leaders promoted within their role. And that's because we gave them real boundaries. We gave their manager coaching on how to assess these skills. And then that was applied in their performance review cycles. So there's two metrics that I'm really proud of. And we're really focused on the satisfaction component, avoiding burnout as we grow.
I love that you're tying that to, excuse me, performance evaluation, because if a company is to expect or encourage employees to be involved in these ways, they have to be aware that this is most often uncompensated work. Even if you give employees, hey, we're going to give you 2 to 5 paid days during the year to volunteer, get back in your community, you're still expecting them to get the same amount of work done. So while it's helpful, that doesn't necessarily solve the problem. So making it promotable work, especially because when it comes to unpaid labor, women, people of color are more likely to be the ones doing it around the office. If you tie it to performance, if you tie it to compensation in some way, it's more of a fair trade. So I'd like to know if anybody else is incentivizing in any way, tying it to compensation or performance evaluation. Is anybody else doing things like that?
So I can say that we aren't yet, but it is something I've been advocating heavily for many years. And one of the things that, I still grapple with I've been around a while, is focusing on the things that you can control and what you can take ownership of. And so what we do at Marsh McLennan now is, I still every year I put my head up, I say we should really have this part of performance review, et cetera, et cetera. It's not my decision to make. But what I do end up providing is for the resource group leaders that, that have been identified, we provide, we fund their giving accounts and we give them funding so that they can make a charitable donation. So again, it's not compensation, but it's an acknowledgement, because oftentimes there needs to be just a general acknowledgement. And yes, compensation is a huge piece of it, but getting that like reward, I see you, I value what you're doing. We give it out in like little bits of money, or someone can just like even call someone and say that, like just acknowledging the work that these people are doing goes really far.
Yeah. And Ben, I'm going to come to you next. There are, I can't quote the statistic off the top of my head, but people don't often want to be financially rewarded for volunteer time, because then it's not volunteer time anymore. And it rubs all the good off of what you've done. So yeah, it's not necessarily, hey, I want to be paid for this extra time, but yeah, I want acknowledgement. I want it to roll into my performance review. I want this to show up that I'm taking initiative, or that I'm learning new skills, because people can learn new skills through ERGs and that kind of thing. So David, I see your hand up, so we're going to come to you.
Well, I wanted to piggyback on what Christine shared, and I agree the acknowledgement is so important. Our customers are not necessarily rewarding participation in those sorts of ERGs, but they are recognizing them. They're using their employee recognition program as a way to call out the ways that individuals and teams are going above and beyond to contribute to the lives of their colleagues and the communities they live and work in. And that has a ripple effect, because it's social, because it's browsable, because it's searchable. Any employee globally can see and then emulate those behaviors. And then managers, of course, have the ability to be kept abreast of the great things employees are doing that might be outside their function.
Mm-hmm. Elizabeth?
And then just really quickly to add to that, the other place where we've seen value is that we have a program called Monster Path, which basically where we meet with employees and talk about kind of where they want to go next in their career and what are the skill sets that they need to get to that next place. And as an example, if you need more leadership experience, any work that you do as part of the ERGs or as part of any of these initiatives is a skill that you are then gaining that you can then put into Path, which then helps you get to the next level. So
ERGs are such a great way to add new skills. I'm wondering if companies are working backward in that way and saying, hey, these are the skills that we want in our companies. Let's use our ERGs, or let's use different community involvement to do that. Vidya, I imagine with Young Professionals for Public Health, you probably brought back a lot of good organizational skills.
Absolutely. But I think it's also, like I mentioned, this opportunity to recruit as well. And so since we leveraged our young professionals group and allowed other people outside of the organization to also join in some of the efforts, some of the speaker series, et cetera, we also identified young professionals who were very engaged in the community, who were very passionate about certain things. And we were able to kind of recruit them back into the organization, and so that they could take a leadership role, not just within the ERG or the affinity group, but also within the organization. And so I think there's multiple ways to do that. The other piece is to make sure that our leadership is also aware of the work that the ERGs are doing. When we talk about compensation is one thing, but recognition, when the CEO comes by and pats you on the back and says, great job, or it shows up to your pride parade that you're hosting, there's something that is that's to be said about feeling the sense of belonging. and the recognition that comes and cascades down from leadership.
I'm wondering if there are ways that employers can set themselves up to respond quickly. So sometimes things like public health will likely be a perennial cause within your organization, but others might arise suddenly. For example, in 2020, when racial justice became, it has always been an issue, people became more aware of it. The recent reversal of Roe v. Wade with the Dobbs decision, the war in Ukraine. Are you guys set up in any way to let employees respond quickly to this? Because, you know, having an ERG set up takes a lot of maintenance and time, but when something comes up quickly that employees want to be involved in. Christine.
Yeah, so we early on had adopted a global platform where at the flip of a switch, we can create a giving campaign. Because what I see time and again, I'm just talking about, like, you know, people within the first 24 to 72 hours of an event taking place. And I mean, I used to say a natural disaster. That was what we used to focus on, but life has evolved so much that I'm just going to call it an event. When a large scale event happens, within the first 24 to 72 hours, that is when people want to act and do something. And so if you don't have the framework and the capacity to meet that demand, you're going to lose out. And so what we've done is we have this global platform that we can easily, like I said, flip of a switch, launch a campaign to support Ukraine, colleagues, people in Ukraine. And, you know, our company, we launched something within 24 hours of the war being, starting. And we said we would match up to $250,000. 48 hours later, that money got exhausted. So we did another $250,000. And 5 days later, that amount got exhausted. And, again, it's the ability to act quick, because that's when people, that's that like knee-jerk reaction. I have to do something before it becomes normalized in the press, before it becomes everyday news, which for a lot of things, that's what happens. Being able to react fast, react early is what is going to really engage our employees and, like, again, create that sense that the company cares and the company is really trying to do something.
I like what you said, Christine, about just the sense that the company cares or leadership cares. What kind of feedback are you guys getting, maybe of that flavor, from employees regarding these causes? Ben, what kind of stuff do you hear from employees who are involved in initiatives like this?
I think to sort of tie in a couple of concepts together, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the idea of executive sponsor. And so this is a leader who is quite senior at the company, is generally paired with a community of employees, perhaps an ERG, to be their advocate, champion, someone to listen to. And I think in these events, as Christine mentioned, there's very much a feeling of helplessness and urgency. And a lot of times employees just desperately want to be heard. And establishing these types of relationships early on with an employee population, however it's determined, the executive sponsor has power to do something or influence, and it's an outlet for employees to engage and to voice their opinions. And then that is the leader's responsibility to advocate on behalf of that community to wherever directionally the business can or should go. And I mention that because it's really, really powerful. It's a two-way street. The executive sponsor gets a lot of training, cultural education from the ERG or community. And I highly recommend these relationships because there's just such value in pairing these bodies together. And especially when events of tragedy happen like this, there's a real mechanism to listen and to bubble up those concerns, to share them with whoever might be able to take action on the social impact team. So that's one of the ways in which I would recommend addressing some of these challenges and bringing employee groups to those who have the most power. I've seen a lot of really incredible things come out of that.
Have any of you had to pass on certain causes, initiatives, things that your employees have wanted to participate in, sort of sponsored through the company, if you have had to pass on things, maybe because they didn't align with company values or for one reason or another, how did you handle that situation? Basically, how did you tell your employees no, and what was the reason that you gave? Anybody passed on stuff?
Well, I will say that I was speaking actually in Dallas, and Vidya, I met your chief talent officer when I was there a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things that came out of that dialogue was employees increasingly looking to the organizations they work for as the last bastions of morality, and wanting the organization to take a stance on particular issues. And the consensus seemed to be that it stems from dissatisfaction employees have with other public institutions. But it is an interesting it is an interesting fence that organizations find themselves on. And what I really like is sort of the combination of what Christine and Ben talked about, that in the aftermath of an event, having tools to be able to respond, whether Vidya is saying, simply creating space to be heard or to give. And then I think the utility of ERGs as you move forward is to carry on the work. Because what leads to employee dissatisfaction is when we issue a press release or we have a town hall, and then there's the feeling like we've wiped our hands and now we're done with that issue, on to the next. And so I think that complement of being able to respond quickly, but then being in it for the long haul through something like ERGs, that seems to be a bit of a recipe for success.
Christine, to wrap up, is there anything that Marsh McLennan, if you've had to pass on or tell employees no, and how'd you do it?
I mean, a lot, because we have 100,000 employees. And so I feel like every week I have to pass on something. And what I usually do is I remind our employees about the things that are available to them. So even though the company is not going to be launching this big global campaign, we do have a matching gifts program where you can direct all of your funding to whatever organization. You have paid time off to volunteer. There are these things that, even though it's not something we could do at a large scale, we provide you with the opportunity at a smaller scale to be able to do that. So that's sort of how we balance it, because you're never going to be able to do all of it. You can't. We're not humanitarian organizations, we're corporations, and we have to act as such. So it's not easy. It's probably the most painful part of my job, but there you have it.
Thanks, Christine. All right, well, that's our time. We're at the top of the hour now. So I want to thank all of our panelists, Vidya, David, Christine, Elizabeth, and Ben. I really appreciate your time and for sharing your knowledge with us. And I'll turn it back over to Steve at From Day One.